So good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. Today we have Theresa Lieb. She is with a group called GreenBiz. They are a media company, and she specializes in agriculture and food. So Theresa, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Wendy. It's a
Of
pleasure
course.
to be here.
Oh, thank you. And I think the work you're doing is amazing. And what most people don't realize is how important it is where and how we get our food. So would you mind just educating a few people out there why this matters? Why is it so important?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that question. It's something that I get frustrated about a lot. I think it comes up in lots of different ways. Like, for example, when you hear, people in Washington talk about climate change, I think most of the discussions are around energy and transportation and infrastructure, maybe. And all of that is really important. But if you look at kind of like the big studies and climate models out there, depending on what you look at, you can see that food and agriculture, that whole system, emits between 25 and 33% of total greenhouse gas emissions.
Oh, wow.
So it accounts for a third of climate change, and a third of the problem, but it can also be a third of the solution. And so I think that is something that is really exciting to think about, and it's also something that I think is really close to home for many people. Everybody eats two at least three times a day, probably. I mean, everybody has, if you're not like fasting or something like that, but we all eat several times a day, and every meal is an opportunity to have a positive impact. And so that is something that I find very empowering, and that can be, like one thing that people can, relatively easily integrate into their lives and be part of a positive change.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up that people don't really think about it because they go to the grocery store, they buy their food. They go to the clothing store, they buy their clothing. They're not really thinking about where it came from. And, one of the first classes, proud UCLA grad here, one of the first classes I took, we talked about the cotton industry. And I had no idea that cotton really depleted the nutrients in soil.
Yeah.
And we basically stuff it with fertilizer just to keep it on life support. And simultaneously how and where we get our food, most people don't want to think about it. It's not a comfortable topic for most people, but the chemical processing that happens, how things are harvested, how our crops are harvested, it's destroying the nutrients in the soil and the vitality of our soils. And yes, it is important. It's a third of our greenhouse gas emissions. It should be given as much attention as infrastructure, as energy. I don't know why it's kind of fallen to the wayside because I guess out of sight, out of mind. But what can we do? What can the average person, like the average viewer watching the show, what small changes can they make in their life to help improve things?
Yeah. Um, so I think there's like several things they can make. And I also like that you bring kind of cotton and fashion into the mix, because it is, I think we have to think about like everything that we buy and consume, and everything that is produced on the limited amount of land that we have. So, the the earth is finite, and the more agricultural like land we take up, the more we kind of like take away from nature and biodiversity, and from like natural landscapes, which are really important to keep things like water cycles going, to
Oh,
keep
huge.
biodiversity and pollinators going, to regulate temperature. So that is like really important, to not for us to not take up more land than we already do, and like possibly reduce the land that we use for agriculture. And so one way to do that is to buy less clothing, and like invest in
Shocker.
like better quality clothing that lasts longer. Like step away from the fashion a little bit, and step away from fast fashion, which I think is there. And the average American, I wrote an article about this a few months ago. I think buys like 80 items of clothing per year, which I found shocking.
That's huge.
and and then the average item of clothing gets thrown away after a year. So like there is a lot of waste in that system that people can just start thinking about a little bit. And then when it comes to food consumption, I think one really easy way uh, to decrease kind of like the negative impact that we have is to reduce meat consumption. And that's something that's not very popular. People don't like it, but it's true and it's important. And I think both like for environmental reasons, but also for health reasons, you know.
Yes.
The average American diet right now is like super meat heavy, and it's not good for the people themselves, and it's not good for our ecosystem. And it's also like this podcast is called Environmental Social Justice. So if we look at the social outcomes of that, you know, the way meat is produced is the working conditions for the people in the farms, in the meat processing facilities, and all of that are really poor. And I think we can improve that a lot. And also, the really large scale factory farms
Oh
have
yeah.
a lot of have a lot of local pollution, and most of the times they are situated in poor Black and brown communities that really suffer from those impacts and have like really damaging health outcomes. And so, you know, like that is something that and there's a great documentary about that, which I forgot the name,
That's
what it's
okay.
called. But yeah, so that's something, you know, like there's like so many benefits to reducing meat consumption. And we have so many great alternatives available now. You know, you can just like eat beans and lentils, and that's like accessible to anyone. And then there's all the alternative proteins out there, like plant-based burgers and chicken nuggets and milk. And like there's like so much out there right now. Some of those products are expensive and not affordable for everyone, but I think the more traditional, like plant-based proteins like beans and lentils, they are actually cheaper than eating meat. And so I would encourage like some of those substitutions. Then something else you can do, you know, eat local and organic food. Organic is always better, using less chemicals in the production. And then another really important thing is to think about food waste. So food waste, you know, like a third of the food in the US is lost or wasted, or potentially like even more than that. And so that is
I
something
believe
that
it.
doesn't make any sense, you know, like nobody wants to throw away food, but we all do. And so just like be more conscious about portion sizes, how much you cook, how much you put on a plate, how much you throw away. Be creative around like reusing some of the food that you have prepared and like new meals, and about like how you shop. And there's like cool apps that can help with some of that as well. Like one that I've recently tried is called Too Good to Go, and especially for people who live in like bigger cities. There's like a lot of options on there already, and I think, you know, like it's slowly growing to smaller cities as well. But it's basically you put in your location, and then you get a range of like restaurants and local grocery stores who are on there, who sell like surplus meals for a third of the original price. And so like you save money, they get a little bit of extra income, and we avoid the food being thrown away. So that is like a really cool thing to try as well.
You know, I'm glad you brought up food waste. So many years ago, I lived in Boston, and I knew people in
Yeah.
the restaurant industry, and they were always talking about, you know, throwing away the food and how they had to destroy the food. And I was like, why are you destroying perfectly edible food? Because at the time, there was a law that said you could not donate restaurant food. They were afraid of lawsuits if anyone got sick. So you
Yeah.
not only had to throw it away, you had to destroy it and make it completely unusable. Fortunately, I believe that law has changed because as a social justice aspect, that's just almost offensive. You know, there are people that could really use the food. Fast fashion, just backing up to one of your comments, I love the fact that you said make things better quality, because that's the one thing we've seen probably in the past 15 years is the quality of materials is gone downhill, because everyone's like, oh yeah, I just went to the store, bought it, I'll throw it away in a year when it unravels. And that was sort of accepted mantra. It was like, yeah, sure, just throw it away. Now I'm thinking back to being a kid of the 70s and 80s. We would buy stuff, and yeah, it was, you know, a bigger price point. Like you look at these trousers, be like, kind of expensive. I had one pair of pants, I kid you not, I bought in the 7th grade, and I finally outgrew them my senior year in high school.
Oh my gosh.
And it wasn't that the material unraveled or the stitching went, I got too tall. And they were floods. I mean, we tried to get every last millimeter out of those hemlines, but finally it was impossible to wear. and perhaps the waistline grew a little bit too. But we need better quality. We need to be more reasonable with some of the price points, because I am seeing cheap materials being sold for hundreds of dollars. It's like the quality is not even there. So we need to kind of go back in time, which then leads me to talking about meat. Growing up, steak was a big deal. You didn't eat beef every single day. That was a special occasion, either at home or you went out. It was not something that you just consumed on a regular basis. And you had fish and chicken and other things. But now people, for some reason, feel they have to have meat, pork, chicken every single day. And you don't. And it's actually not great for your digestive system. You can get nutrients other ways that are more digestible and better for your health. So we're going to see spikes in like cholesterol, heart disease, when all of that could be easily avoided. So I just wanted to kind of grow on what you had said, because it's so hugely important that people understand that it's, kind of get it out of your head of the social status of I'm able to buy this and I can do that and I can go here. Do what's right for you.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, and something that I also, like, we think that eating meat so many times per day or per week is like the normal thing to do. But I think it actually has only been normal for like one generation.
Yeah.
And before that, maybe even for like the past like 20, 30 years. And before that, it hasn't been normal. Like my family growing up, like my mom and my grandma tell me these stories all the time, how they only had meat on Sundays and then like maybe some leftovers on Mondays and Tuesdays, but that was about it.
Yeah.
That is basically how it should be, and what we have to go back to. And like nobody in history has been able to consume meat to the extent that we do today, and it's not healthy and it's not good for anyone. And if you talk about the cost that you just kind of like mentioned in fashion, like it applies to meat as well. Oh. And there is like a growing movement like within the food space where people start talking about the true cost of food. So trying to develop like true cost accounting models, which is a fancy way of saying that, cheap meat isn't really cheap, like, because you only pay a fraction of the actual price of the production, because a lot of other people are picking up the rest of the cost, like, and that is like the healthcare system, local pollution, like, those externalities that very expensive. That don't actually get accounted for by the companies producing that meat, because they're legally not responsible for the outcomes of it. And that is like a big policy kind of failure, I would say. And so, like, even if something looks cheap, it's not really cheap. We just pay the cost in other ways.
Yeah, it's not a cash cost. It's quality of life and pollution cost. And one thing to add on that, which most people probably don't realize, I highly recommend for viewers to just look up what a commercial farming facility looks like. It is not the happy little cow frolicking in a field. It's a pretty awful, grim image. These cows are not exposed to grass. They are in mud, like usually knee-deep mud, and they're caked in it. And it's not, it's other things in addition to the mud. And they're fed grain, and grain's not great. Cows were not meant to eat corn. It was not on their food chain. They're grass eaters. Seaweed's great too. But, we kind of need to fix what we broke. And a lot of that, in my personal opinion, means we have to think back to the way things used to be. Go back 50, 60 years. How did we do it then before we muddled things up? And I think that's what is awesome with what you're doing, is you are bringing this to people's attention. You are, you're a speaker, you're a moderator, you are in media. This is exactly what people need. So please, guys, reach out to Theresa. She's awesome. But, as we close out, anything, last words of wisdom that you wanted to share?
I think just like start with something, like start with one meal that you think you can change, say, or people come up with like different ways of doing it. There's like meatless Mondays, so on Mondays you don't eat meat, Or you can say, some people say, oh, like no animal products before dinner, or like I only eat it on the weekend, and then you make like a special thing out of it. So, I think there's lots of different ways to get going. And I think the important thing is just to like try to create over time more sustainable and healthier habits. And
Yeah.
and just like keep informing yourself, keep reading about it. There's lots of great books. I write a weekly newsletter about food and ag that people can subscribe to if they want to, keep reading about it. And I think this is a great first kind of nudge for people to be more aware of
every little bit helps.
what they eat.
It's every little bit. And, I like the fact that you said, maybe focus on the big meals on the weekend, because that also brings back family time, something we've also strayed from. Everyone's doing fast food and eat it now and just whip something out and throw it on the dinner table and leave. Maybe we kind of go back to those Sunday dinners where that's your big meat day. And then the rest of the week is the leftovers and then just some veg. And then you kind of do that big family day again. So I think that's beautiful advice. I really like that. And I'm a cook. I love cooking. So I'm thinking, oh, I got plans.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. This has been brilliant. So thank you, Theresa. Thank you, GreenBiz. Guys, keep doing what you're doing. You're amazing.
Thank you. All right. So nice to